Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Early Efficiencies, Prioritizing Your Time in MacAdmin Automation Best Practices. My name is Caroline Bodager, and I'm a MacAdmin at Wellesley College outside of Boston.
And my name is Ross Matsuda. I'm a system administrator with Forget Computers. We're an MSP based out of Chicago.
Ross and I met at one of these conferences, and this year we decided to put together this talk for newer MacAdmins. So today we're going to do a high-level overview of some high-value topics. We're going to introduce you to tools and practices that we use. We're going to share our experiences and some recommendations that we have from our first few years. And we hope that this serves as a good jumping-off place for you to do your own research moving forward.
Now, we'll break this down into 5 primary sections today. We're going to start off with automating yourself, things that you can do and services you can use to apply some of these ideas of more structured automation to how you do what you do. We're going to go into nomenclature, the art of assigning things names, homogeneity of settings, how you're going to sort of keep those unified across your fleets, a little bit of time on printer automation, and then wrap up with homogeneity of software. Same thing with settings, but this time with application deployments. But let us dive right in. So let's talk about automating yourself, because all these ideas and these solutions can be applied to the human level rather than just the software one. And I think the best place to begin here is going to be talking about tasks. What are tasks? A task is any verb you engage in. It can be a single item, it can be a part of a much larger task. But the important things here is if you're going to be doing it, you can write it down. You can get that list of what you need to do next, keep tabs on what you're currently working on, and oftentimes it can be very helpful to take those tasks and collaborate with other people in your organization. Now, the platform that I've been using for this is called Trello, hashtag not sponsored, and it's been what's working well for me and my team. And basically it allows us to create individual task cards like we've got here on the right. You see we've got a title and description for the task where we just jot down any basic information we can think of. We can attach references, links, screenshots, just any relevant data that we need to keep track of. You can, of course, add your due dates. Nice thing about Trello is that does allow you to work with teams and collaborate, so you can have multiple users contributing to the same task card. Now that's one task. Let's talk about what you can do with a whole bunch of them. Now, you're going to want to structure these into different sorts of groups or categories, and one method that's worked for me, at least to begin with, is called Kanban. This is sort of an offshoot of personal Kanban if you've subscribed to any of the getting things done methodologies. And this is just a couple initial categories to get you beginning. Tasks are always going to try to move from the left to the right in this example. You can see we've got 4 initial categories, a back burner of items that should be done at some point but aren't terribly pressing. You have your much more active and focused to-do list, and then, of course, your items that are currently in progress, those plates you're spinning right now. Once any of your tasks are done, you can shuffle them off into the completed section, where they're going to live for perpetuity. As you spend more time in Trello or in any task management system, you're probably going to want to segment that completed list by year or month, quarter, whatever works for you based on your timeline. So again, I do recommend checking Trello out or a similar service. Accounts are free to start, and you can really focus on just grouping your to-dos. You can prioritize them based on the needs of your organization and make sure that nothing sort of slips through the cracks.
So along with organizing your daily tasks, it's important to plan for your entire year as well. Good news, Apple works pretty well with a well-known timeline. We get one OS each fall. I recommend that you identify your deadlines and work backwards to ensure that you know what's coming and how much time things actually take. Each year I plan to do my beta testing of the new Mac OS after this very conference, because someone will give an amazing presentation about the upcoming OS and give me a head start with tips, tricks, and their feedback. This year it's Robert Hammond. He'll be presenting on Mac OS 11 on Thursday, July 30th. Are you working in the context of an academic semester schedule, or do you need more immediate patches and fixes? Create a calendar with your licenses. Here's an example from the SHI blog who we use. I know this way you can know approaching expiration dates. Keep this calendar updated and close by, or at least try to become very good friends with whoever your license manager is. So now you have your known dates and renewals and other deadlines unique to your environment in mind. I recommend creating a timeline now for your ideal year. Include these deadlines, plenty of buffer time, and space for those unexpected projects that pop up. Plan your year so that things don't sneak up on you, and if this is your first year as a Mac admin, as you progress, take notes on what actually took place so that you can make a more refined or accurate timeline next year.
Great. You've got your individual tasks. You've associated those with a calendar. Now, what happens to the work you're actively doing, what you're learning as you do it? Well, if you're anything like me, you're going to want to write it all down. Everyone learns and retains information in slightly different ways. For me, storing that all, typing it out is the best way for me to go. I used to use Evernote for this. I then switched over to Simple Note for my non-work notebooks, and nowadays I'm actually using Microsoft OneNote. So first things first, let's talk about how these notes are going to affect you. Google foo without the Google. If you look it up, if you research it, you're going to be sifting through a tremendous amount of information, and you're going to be taking that data and just taking the stuff that you really need from it. Make some notes. Record your relevant search results and links, and all that distilled information that you gleaned in a single spot. This can also include troubleshooting steps. OneNote and many of these other platforms also support images and links. And this is just really capitalizing on the fact that research that you have already completed is going to be much more valuable to you if you can view it in an easy way rather than going back to square one every time you need to look it back up. Once you've got this notebook sort of going for yourself, creating a second one for your team or for other collaborators can be really, really helpful. As you're creating this sort of team notebook, start thinking much more about the user experience. So you're going to want to categorize your notes. You're going to want to group together your pages or notes into these categories as best you can so that there's a very clear and intuitive hierarchy of information. The basic idea here is the cleaner your information is structured here, the higher the probability that people who need to access it will be able to take care of whatever issues they're dealing with themselves, which is a great feeling for them, and it also frees up more of your time. So let's look at an individual note inside of here. Anything you can do to remain brief is going to be worth its weight in gold. You can see on the right, we've got a basic visual hierarchy. It doesn't need to be complicated, but it's relatively easy to see the individual titles for each of these little sections. We've got screenshots if needed. Just note I didn't need them. And then you'll see near the bottom, I've got sort of a history section I've labeled here as old info. And as the symptom is changed over the course of a different operating system or two, I like to retain that older information just so we have it in case needs be. Down at the bottom, I've got an example of a couple tags, and if you can toss these in there, this is just going to really help with search engine optimization inside your note-taking platform to make sure that your users or yourself has the highest chance of finding what they're seeking by leveraging these tags. You know, if you repeat tasks with any degree of frequency, do consider making a task list through a service like Teamwork or just building your own. But the basic idea is Teamwork allows us to build some complex checklists, update them whenever we need to, and anytime we perform that verb, we go through the workflow. And I'm doing the same thing, my teammates are doing the same thing, we just go through it top to bottom. It's great for making sure that nothing gets missed, or when you're doing things like onboarding, new Mac setups, data migrations, things like that. Documentation services, there are some more powerful ones that can be important for organizations that have much more complex data structures. IT Glue is one of these services, and the way they set up their site is much more tailored towards IT. It works really, really well for us as an MSP so that we can keep a lot of secure data very accessible and easy to use for us to look up all the information we have for dozens of different tech environments. Bottom line with this, automation is about repeating actions fewer times. That includes your research. And by taking good notes, you're going to make sure to arm yourself with the best information for the future. But speaking of storing that information, your inline documentation is also very, very important. You are going to be writing some code. And how you treat your inline documentation is going to make things much easier for you in the present, future, and for any other developers you end up working with. Focus always on clarity of thought, and again, brevity is key here. You can save yourself a lot of additional typing and documentation by just naming your variables and functions well, And you should always think about this. Anytime you're adding documentation inline in your code, you are adding additional value. But let's go ahead and take a look and start at top with title card. So this is just a title section for any given script. You'll see on the right here, we've got two examples, the top one in Bash, the bottom one in Swift. And we're just spelling out some real basic things. We've got the author, the date that this was worked on, and then some sort of goal or summary for what we're going to be doing inside the script. I do usually recommend including any relevant links. If you source some information from GitHub, or you found a great discussion on Jamf Nation or MacAdmins that helped you write what you wrote, by including those links, you'll be able to look that up again if you ever need to. So once you finish that up, breaking up your body is going to be really helpful here. And so before we actually start writing the code, finding out where it's all going to land will help this stay simple. You can see I've got a variable section at the top, the example on the right. Anything inside there will be items that we need to change. And then I've got a do not edit below this line. Now, if I'm ever going to repurpose this code, knowing that anything underneath that line can more or less be left alone is going to really help me, especially for things like installers, reuse this in multiple places quickly. Underneath that, you can, of course, make separate sections for your functions and function calls as you wrap up. And last, let's get to those body comments themselves. Now, mixed in with your code, anytime you're adding comments, always remember that this is trying to be human readable logic. And so you can see in the top example, just dropped in a quick comment at the top of the section, output the values we need. This is what I'm going to be doing in these next couple lines. And then I included a little bit of additional information on the definition of what's coming out from each of those lines. In the lower example, this is just turning off some optional functionality along with the reason that I'm doing it, so that if I come back later, I see, oh, well, I turned this off because I was worried that I might pull information from disk images, and then we can leave that code intact and uncommented if we need to in the future. The goal of all this is future-proofing your work. A lot of people say that you should write your code in such a way so that if you get hit by a bus, that the next person who sits down at your desk and pulls up your information, they know exactly what you're thinking and what your code meant and can just pick up immediately. I want to be a little bit more selfish than that. Code for yourself in 2.5 years when you have to change something in here and you just want to be able to pick up and know what your past self meant, which is going to save you a whole lot of time. Speaking of time saving, the idea of code snippets. Now, I mentioned sort of customizing existing code and reusing it. The idea of snippets is the idea of creating multiple scripts and saving them as building blocks so that you can reuse these in multiple places. If you include that information, those links to where and how you learn about them, that'll be helpful as well. But the end goal for this is to end up with something like these. These are some examples of some very, very basic code blocks to begin with. We can see you can use templates for if statements if you want to check if a file exists. Great. You can add that, change the variable, reuse that piece of code. You can also build similar blocks for loops, basic installer instructions. These are great things to just have at your beck and call. You build it once, and you can redeploy it when you need to. As you get into more and more advanced work, especially in Bash, it can help to have some more complex snippets. Snippets that'll help you with printer automation, things that can list out all the available user accounts on a Mac, and then you can act on those accounts, copying files, then changing settings. More complex installers, including curl installers, where you don't need to provide the package, you pull it from the website. Locating kernel extension whitelist, there's a lot of things that you can do with this. And here's just one example of what I consider sort of a completed snippet, and this is an OS checker that's compatible with Big Sur. And all I'm doing here is you'll see I've got my title block, I've got my variables, in this case it's just one, it's the target OS that I want to compare against the current machine, and then I've got that do not edit below this line, and then the rest of the logic sort of follows in from there. So once you've got these things built, you got to get them safe. You got to store them so that nothing, you can't lose this information just on whim. Version control is an enormous and very important subject. I cannot encourage you enough to check out Git and GitHub. There's some other third-party solutions. Bitbucket, SourceTree has a nice GUI application you can use for this. But until you've got that up and running, or if you're not quite ready and comfortable with those services, even getting your data just into cloud storage somewhere, that's something. It's something to start with so that you won't lose that information. So your workflow here, you learn it, you make it specific, deploy it to your fleet, and then make it yours forever. Make sure that you can continue to use that information next time it comes up. The text editor I was using in the previous slides is called Atom. Here's a quick link to that. And all of this, when it comes to automating yourself, it's really just about spending less time thinking and more time doing.
So now we're going to discuss nomenclature, and this section will cover inventory structure and improving inventory usability for you. So our goal is to save time in the future by being thoughtful and intentional in how you organize your devices. So specifically with devices, this will have a positive quality of life impact on yourself and your support team and your users going forward. When considering nomenclature, these are really just the best practices and sort of pinnacles that we look for. So uniqueness, making sure that each computer can be found amongst the others. Anonymity is a consideration. Standards and uniformity, making sure you have the same system throughout. Consider your length, if there's a length limit with any of your systems. Scalability, of course, to make sure that as you grow, as you add computers, the system that you have for nomenclature can expand with those new computers. And then we care about inventory ease of use. And really, if you've achieved all those things above, the inventory ease of use will come along with it. I'm going to walk you through my workflow of how I name computers. So in my higher ed environment, we specify between faculty and staff and class lab computers. So we do a quick type at the front of our computer name. We go ahead and add the username. We do include username. It's easier for us and our users. After that, we specify the model and install date. This is important for us because we operate on a semester schedule, and it's helpful for our techs to know sort of what in that moment was software that we might have deployed around that time. We have a sense of what hardware limitations we might have faced then too with the model. And then we also instituted an encryption tag. So we added an FV in the middle of the name in order to indicate that we had actually enabled File Vault on that machine. And you can see at a glance what was going on with that computer. In terms of scalability, our naming convention allows for building changes because we don't name a building and our users are pretty mobile. For staff or user changes, we would totally refresh the computer and re-provision it. So we would switch out the username. And for new computers going forward, this was a really easy naming convention to maintain as we added new computers and we could have that scalability feature. We do have a policy to prevent name changes in case a user has a bunch and they want to add their own computer name. We are a Jamf shop and we have a policy that upon inventory update would reset the computer name back to normal. You can also use scripts to set computer name via information on the computer, like serial number or changing parts of the name based on IP address. We'll also talk about fleets. In our Jamf space, once again, we have the ability to use smart groups. Smart groups are critical for our workflow because you are able to identify variables present. There are many. It could involve the computer name. It could involve an application installed, the IP, all these things. And then you create a smart group by defining categories with a has, is, or is not. And essentially, computers enter or exit the smart group whether or not they meet those criteria that you've defined. It's helpful for tracking. In our higher ed space, for example, our class lab machines, we have them fall into groups where they haven't checked in 7, 14, or 30 days. A computer that hasn't checked in 7 days, we might not be too worried about it. We might be on spring break, but a computer that's not checked in 30 days might be something that hasn't been reported and we're able to send a tech. What we're tracking there is the last check-in date, and then the computer name helps us know which computer lab space it's found in.
Now, smart groups are incredibly powerful. Sometimes you also need a static hierarchy underneath that or alongside of it. In Addigy, we deal with those in what are called policy hierarchies. Now with Forget Computers, again, we're an MSP, so we work with a lot of different organizations. So we start our hierarchy based on the type or tier of our client subscriber. So you can see we've got a couple different categories there: core maintenance, enterprise, pro support, etc. Inside of that, we'll then have the client name. And once we've got the name, we're always going to have two nested policies underneath it, one called inventory and one called actions. Computers that live in the inventory policy generally don't have anything done to them. We just know they exist and know that they're in the list ready to go. But anything that's in the actions policy, that's where we've got the bulk of our work happening, with software distribution, making settings changes, things like that. Inside of the actions bucket, we will then generally break out based on physical location or department, based on the needs of the organization. And we'll usually keep our iOS devices separate there, just to make sure that if we have any MDM profiles that are compatible with both iOS and Mac, that we don't have them cross-pollinating in a way that we don't explicitly want them to. When it comes to naming your devices, this should be simple, this should be logical, functional, and scalable. Ideally secure, because no one likes being on InfoSec's bad side.
So now that the boat is built, we'll start at device settings. We'll explore using scripts to push settings and talk about the importance of MDM going forward to access those settings that are becoming harder and harder to manage in newer operating systems. So you should consider what you want to manage versus what you want users to do for themselves. Just quickly, we think about these things in terms of homogeneous, like settings that you want to be all alike for all of your users across the environment. These can be unique to your environment, where you'd say you definitely want everyone connected to a certain network. But then we also have heterogeneous ones where, these can be a lot more diverse. Maybe you don't need to be as specific, and you can have a little more diversity there. So you need to think about what you want your ideal experience to be when a user turns on their computer, and that will help you target what settings you want to control. So what do you want to do when you set up a computer? Are there any tasks that you do on a pretty much every machine or on a regular basis? That's your target for automation. For security and compliance, the most important thing you would need to look at, you might want to enable your file vault, take the guesswork out of it for your users. For the user experience, what can you do to improve the quality of the user's time on their device so that they can get straight to their work, let the technology fall into the background? For network access, think about pre-approval for things that they need. Also restrict access for things they don't need. For printers, how close can you get to zero effort for that user and reduce those calls to the help desk? For preferred tools, you could set default mail client, browser, PDF reader, let those apps, you have that control from the MDM. So what do these have in common? These all make the user's life better while minimizing their need for IT support going forward. Considering fleet uniformity, you have that detail hierarchy you just made. So think about what settings reach your broadest audience first and focus on building those policies, and then grow in specificity as you work. And finally, you don't have to do everything. It is healthy to say that you can let the user change some preferences on their own, things that are highly personal or outside of scope. Not every single doc needs to be totally customized.
So user accounts, these are a type of setting, and not only how they're treated, but creating and deploying them as well. Generally speaking, the sort of backbone of this is going to be the sysadmin CTL command in Bash, and this is platform agnostic. If you can get access to SSH or something on a Mac, you can deploy an account like this. There's a couple very important flags here. Of course, you need to provide an admin user and password. These are the credentials for an account that already is an existing admin and has permission to create accounts. Your add user field is going to be your short name, full name is the long name, and your desired password for the account. You can define what you want their default shell to be, define their home folder locations, especially helpful if you've got computers that have separate boot drives and storage drives, and of course that last admin flag. One thing to know about this is that this is great for building the account itself, but building an account in this way will not give it secure tokens. Just keep that in mind if you've got file vaults enabled across your fleet. Addigy has an option for doing this inside the web portal. This deploys via a standard non-MDM profile. You can see we've got pretty much the same basic options here. Username, full name, password, the admin flag. And just like building in Bash, though, this will not give you that secure token.
A few more things I like to automate in terms of user accounts. For all of our class lab machines, we bind them to Active Directory. So you might know this as the go to system preferences, users and groups, login options, join network, and eventually you get there. But this is something you can automate with a script. So here's an example of the script I use. You need a domain admin, domain password, all listed there. We will make the slides available at the end of this as well. We can also create management accounts via Jamf. So this is what we use for our workflow, especially if a tech goes on site and suddenly needs access to an admin account. Jamf Remote is a tool where you can create an account and then specify whether or not it's an admin on the machine. Maybe the tech just needs it as a quick access, or if you have machines that have users who rotate in and out, this is a great way to push an account quickly for a user to get access to a computer. Another example I have is for account management automation. In our lab spaces on campus, our students log in and it creates a new home folder for each student every time. And especially in high trafficked labs, our computers can begin to fill up. If we are not necessarily refreshing the computer and totally reinstalling stuff in between every semester, it's really helpful to be able to delete old accounts or accounts that haven't been touched after a certain amount of time. So my first script to do this specifies a date, and it basically deletes accounts that are older than or haven't accessed the computer since that date. It's slightly bolded there. Removing lab users basically allow you to have a quick little refresh on the computer between semesters or even mid-semester. To automate, although this script, I had to mentally, remember what date I was going to do and run the script, but there is a way to do this that it can be ongoing and a little bit more set and forget. So the next script I have here, I specified that accounts that are older than 99 days get deleted. So this is an account or a script that I have ongoing as a policy where it runs and every single day it checks and any account that hasn't been touched in 99 days is deleted. It's a great set and forget. Our labs don't need to be touched, and it's been a good upgrade and time saver for us so far. The way that this looks in our Jamf Pro is under policies. We have delete old accounts ongoing. We're super specific with our script names, and you can see that it's an ongoing script upon check-in for every computer.
Now, MDM configurations, this is the way that Apple really is trying to push for all of us to deploy settings across Macs going forward. The nice thing about them is that they are incredibly consistent. When you're building an MDM configuration, that's going to be pumped out as a .mobile config file that you can then deploy to your fleets. And these guys, once installed on the computer, they are constantly checked and enforced. It's not just like hitting a switch and leaving it be, but it's going to continue to maintain that settings choice to make sure that the user doesn't change it. If they can change it, that it gets switched back. One of the great things about mobile config files is that these are universal across macOS, tvOS, and iOS. And so getting used to working in this format is going to really help if you've got that sort of diversity in the fleet. Again, this is the recommended method by Apple. And on the right here, I've got a screenshot of Apple's Configurator 2. This is their first-party application for building these mobile config files. Now, there's just a boatload of things that you can configure in here. Network settings can be incredibly important. Wi-Fi payloads, mail settings, you can get as specific as building individual payloads per device. I tend to stick more to things that will hit multiple devices, so 802.1x authentication, things like that. On the right here, we've also got another third-party application for performing the same tasks. This is Profile Creator. There's a lot of different pieces of software that you can use as a front end to get these built. As far as local security settings, you can customize things like the behavior when the Mac turns on to begin with, what appears at login window, how does the user interact with that. Your energy saver settings. Neat thing, you can deploy printers in this fashion, but do be aware that it will not install drivers. It's just going to do the basic printer mapping. So if you do want to deploy your printers this way, you will need to find a way to get those drivers on your computer first. More on that in a little bit. And one neat thing that you can do in this is enable File Vault. Now, this is really helpful, especially going through an MDM solution, because it allows you the ability to escrow your File Vault recovery keys. So as soon as that device is encrypted, the user's password is going to work to get them in there, but your MDM solution, Addigy, Jamf, whatever you're running, is going to retain that recovery key online that you can always use in case of emergency, and you can even rotate it out and change it for security purposes if you ever need to. On the right, this is the last of the third-party apps we'll look at right now, and this is called iMazing Profile Editor. This is just a third version of a similar piece of software.
So Ross talked about enabling File Vault also via Jamf. So we do that via a smart group where we define the fact that a certain admin account is present, and then calling back to the naming convention we used before, the fact that FSFV is at the beginning of the computer name, puts those machines in that smart group. We then create a policy, and the policy is to encrypt the machine, and we scope it to that smart group that we've defined. And so essentially computers will enter that smart group, they get encrypted, and we are also through Jamf able to track all of the file vault recovery keys. We give certain access to text at certain times, and it's a great way to automate that setting for sure.
So let's wrap up this section with just a quick review of some of these tools we were talking about. As far as the MDM programs, Configurator 2 is available on the App Store. It's free to download, great to just have to take a look at. And then these other solutions, Profile Creator is available on GitHub, and iMazing has their own software suite available on their website. One of the other types of settings we talked about was setting default applications. There's a couple different ways to do this. I've personally been using Swift default apps. Duty is another great solution that was developed a couple of years ago. And you're also going to need to pay attention to these, PPPCs and Kext Whitelisting. Now, for PPPC utility, this is an app developed by Jamf and distributed. It's wonderful. It allows you to just select what exact permissions that any given app is going to require. Build that up as an MDM config, and you can deploy that before the app goes out. You can also build your Kext whitelists in Profile Creator, which I've had some good luck with as well.
We also recommend this lovely book by Charles Edge and Rich Troughton, not sponsored, but you might know Rich Troughton's blog, and this is a great book, reminds us all why we're here, highly recommend. So we are trying to ensure a uniform experience for a better UX while protecting your time. And then that way you have less variables to troubleshoot.
Oh boy, printers. All right, so as long as we're going to be working in shared environments, or when we can return to working in shared environments, printers are going to eat up a lot of your time. And anything that you can do to minimize that friction for yourself and for your users is going to be really, really helpful. Let's start off with just a basic orientation, then we'll get into the thick of it. So when you're setting up a printer by scratch, of course, this is the workflow that you're used to. You're in the Apple menu, System Preferences, Printers and Scanners. We don't have the luxury of that. We're going to be doing this all using LPadmin. When you're using LPadmin, you're going to be collecting a series of flags, and these are very important to make sure that everything gets mapped the way you want. Just real quick on some of these arguments, you can see that first P argument is just going to be the queue name, print queue name. You'll notice there's no white space in there. -V is your printer URI. This is the address on the network where you're going to be pointing your devices. You've got -D, which is your human readable description. This will be what the printer looks like to the end user when they're trying to select from their list of printers. You have -L, your location flag. -P is the location of the print driver file itself, your PPD. -E is going to be a flag to allow cups encryption. And finally, we've got -O, which is going to be can be a very large list depending on what you need of all of your cups options.
So if you're not familiar with cups, you have to enable it first on your machine via terminal with that command listed there, and then you're able to go to a web interface and enter localhost 361. From there, you'll be able to go to administration and manage your printers, and if you're prompted for an admin password, it's your local computer password. So one example of something I like to automate for our users is when adding a printer through the advanced cog, users are often sent to this nondescript gray area where they have to right-click on it and then somehow, like iOS, drag and drop an application there. And to prevent all of that time and calls to the help desk, we actually found where the plist is that has this setting. So once you already have the gear cog there, you'll find in this plist that I've listed, the advanced gear cog appears. And what we're able to do is take that adjusted plist, that adjusted setting, and actually just deploy that updated plist to machines. And so that advanced gear cog comes standard when users receive their machine, and then they go to add a printer via the advanced gear cog. It's already there. And so in the end, this reduces the number of steps for the user. It's little pieces, little touches like this that you can find that if you can automate them, it'll make things a lot smoother moving forward for you and your users. So next I'm going to talk about the Jamf workflow for adding a printer, how we use a self-service option, and basically our main workflow and best practice. So in Jamf Pro, you'll make your way to computer management settings and click the printer icon. You'll get to a list of existing printers, and from there you can select to edit or add new. At this point, you'll be able to adjust the display name and define your category. And in our case, we do categorize by location. Next, you'll need the queue name, model, device URI, and the PPD file. And you add all of this together, and you've added the printer to Jamf. Next, you need to create a policy in Jamf. You'll go to Policies, you'll add new or edit existing, go to Options in General, and this is where you have to change the display name. This is internal for you. You'll click Enabled, the category is all right, and then you do need to add the printer that you added previously. So you'll select and add that specific printer. Upon adding it, you have to define what action will take place. In this case, it's map. You do have an option to check on or off set as default. I don't necessarily recommend it as your users move around their environment. They don't necessarily need every new printer to become their default. It is an option though if people are more stationary where you are. And then still in the policy, you'll move over in Jamf to the self-service tab. And then there you can enable the policy in self-service by checking the box. And here are 3 fields that are visible to the client. So you have the self-service display name, we just use the printer name. And then what comes standard are the words install and reinstall. Install is pretty good. Reinstall could be a little bit confusing. You could have it say add the printer again or something like that. You'll see in my example with self-service what would make sense for your environment. So if you scroll down a little further in self-service, you actually have the option to add an icon. If you were to add this printer locally on your machine through the GUI, it can provide a little icon. I just took a screenshot of it and we use it. We actually find that our users do remember what their machines look like, so it's been helpful for them in the self-service to see that. The more machines you use over time, Jamf does save, and you can have existing icons or previously used icons there, so you don't have to repeat that work. Next, you'll need to test in self-service. So our printers are deployed globally. They're scoped out to everyone. So remember the policy is enabled, check your scope, and then go to a machine that you can test your self-service. So you'll launch self-service. You'll navigate to the category that you've defined, and then you can click Install. The way our self-service works is done, is briefly displayed, and then it will finally rest and display on reinstall when the printer has been added. So again, if reinstall isn't quite right for your environment, you can change that text.
Now over in Addigy, we have the same basic steps, but everything's, like it always is, just a little bit different. The core stuff is really the same though. Whenever we have a client ask, if they can have a printer deployed automatically, we need to collect some basic information. You can see on the right the name, the location, IP address. For a lot of enterprise printers, you're going to want to know about what sort of finishers or optional add-ons are installed in that printer, since that'll change some of the things you can set by default. And we also often deal with multiple presets if users want to make sure that not only do they want to set that the printer is single-sided or double-sided by default, but they want to have an easy way for their users to switch between the two or change their color settings, things like that. Once that's done, we go ahead and locate our driver installer from the manufacturer. Always check to make sure that you're getting something for the right country as far as your default paper size, so A4 versus letter for this Konica that we're looking at. And always confirm your OS compatibility, especially if you have a lot of different operating systems currently in production. Once that's set, we'll get on network and we just do a basic mapping. Get everything set up and fill in every field as close as we can to what we want in the end, just to minimize the sort of tweaking we need to do later. Remember cups, that's common Unix printing system. We had that enabled earlier. And once you're logged into the cups interface, you can set a lot of defaults for your printer. Anything the client requests, we make those changes in here, get that saved. Then we head over into terminal and actually output that information, store it. You can see you've got this LP options command just to get that information out. And your result's going to look like something you see at the top of the screen. It's pretty dense. But you're pretty much looking at key value pairs where you've got the name of the variable on the left and then your values on the right. You're going to look for your asterisks. Those are going to indicate which setting is currently active. So you're going to try to find the items that you changed, that you had to manually set, get those documented so you know the name of the value. And as far as the key, you'll notice that all those variable names are separated by a slash. Generally speaking, you're going to want to use the first name that's listed or the one that doesn't have white space. The way that that's listed with white space is generally they consider the human readable version. But as far as the LP options and LP admin command, you're going to want to use the one that does not have white space to actually set those values. Once we've got our defaults built, then we can talk about presets. And so you can see in this example, I've got 4 presets built for single or double-sided, then black and white or color. Once we've got all this created and set up the way we want, you can extract those by just pulling out this file. It's in your user library of what you're working in. And the name's always going to be the same except for that entry print queue name here. That'll be the name of the print queue you defined earlier. Once you've got that file, you can then use a code snippet as a template if you like, and deploy that file to all the home folders on a computer when you push the printer. Now, once that's all set, we're going to harvest all this information into a script. The script that I've been using was written by Sean Maddock. He's available on Slack. He's a wonderful, wonderful resource for Addigy and many other things. And what we do is we just dump all the information that we've gleaned into this single file. We run the script, and that outputs 3 separate final scripts. What we do is we take these, and this is the same 3 tenants that all of Addigy custom software is built on. We've got a condition, which in our case tests for the presence of the driver, whether it's installed or not, the version, whether the print queue is present or not, or if the settings have been changed, if important settings have been changed. If any of those get flagged as bad, we then run the install script, which adds or updates the driver, re-adds the queue, and that's where we'll actually deploy our presets as well. Lastly, we have the option for a removal script, where if we take a computer from one policy into a different one, whether that's a different building or a different part of the company, the removal script will run, which just removes the queue, keeps the driver just in case we need it again, but makes sure that users don't have to go in there and curate their printer list quite so specifically. All this, automating printer deployment is a huge win-win. It's less frustration for your users and your support desk if you can get this kind of stuff moving.
So for our last section, we'll discuss app deployment, give a walkthrough of our workflows in Jamf and Addigy, discuss Apple Business Manager, BPP, give an introduction to PPPC and Kext Whitelisting. So first, let's discuss our distribution workflows. In Jamf, we have many tools at our disposal. My workflow is that first we gather requests and requirements from our faculty and staff. We're on a semester schedule, so we usually work about a semester ahead of time. And we also have to know what our licensing needs or requirements are in terms of when things are going to expire. We build our packages. We have some hotfix solutions. I consider those when we ever need to do a license fix in the middle of a semester. I can't emphasize enough, consider your calendar, make sure that you know when your semester deadlines are occurring, and then you need to have all of your time for testing and testing a little more. With Jamf, you can build packages, both DMG and PKG. Remember, PKG allows you to have a post-install or a pre-install script attached. You can also have separate scripts, which I use as hotfixes. And then in terms of considering your user template, Jamf allows you to have DMGs fill a user template or fill existing user home directories. We use Composer to build in Jamf. It's a great way to deconstruct existing installers you might have to see all the steps in place. You can build in your scripts here. You can share with one another if you have other techs building with you. Composer is a great tool to then build as a DMG or PKG or view source of an existing package. So after you've built everything in Composer, so you know exactly where you've put everything, you have your application all there, I really recommend building a script that will remove what you just built. So you know what little edits you've made, you know like all the application support files you've put into place. A year from now, you might not remember all of that. So build it now, and then you can make these removal scripts available to various people. So you can make it available to your user in a PKG that they can double click. You can make it available via your self-service or as a tool for your techs to use. This helps you manage future versions, especially if you might need to just quickly uninstall a single application in the middle of a semester before uploading a new one. Jamf Pro does list all of your scripts. It also lists all of your packages. Note that packages in Jamf Pro do display whether or not your user template and existing users is filled or not. Then we'll move on to configuration. So you have your packages built. Now you need to build your configuration out for where the packages will go. Jamf allows you to have static configurations and smart configurations. Smart configurations inherit those above it. So in this example here, you can see there's a general configuration. Perhaps we would install that at an instructor station. And then one step above that would be a science configuration where we might add a few more bits of software. We can nest these configurations and name them in such a way that we know exactly what's happening. So here you can see that you can, the MAL lab is highlighted. You can see that these are packages that we specifically put here. If I were to check show items from parent configurations, you would see all of the additional packages that would be assumed. This is nice because you can make a change in exactly one place and it will be applied throughout. Note our naming convention. We use CL to specify that we're talking about class lab. And then you see these other things starting with ZZZZ. That's important because our techs, when they go to use Jamf Imaging actually lists things in alpha order. So by putting the ZZZ things at the very bottom here, it actually saves our techs time. It puts things out of the way that they don't need to be clicking on necessarily. So it keeps what's relevant closer to the top. For Jamf deployment, we have a lot of tools at our disposal: remote, imaging, recon, quick add packages, things like that. So enrolling a computer in Jamf can be done through applying a configuration through imaging. It can be done through user-initiated enrollment. It can be done through a quick add package. These are all things that allow you to then put in the MDM. Meanwhile, Jamf Imaging is great for a brand new computer where you would want to put in your full configuration, you know exactly what's going on to the machine. Jamf Remote is what we use for quick updates or one-offs throughout our labs or throughout a semester. And basically, we're able to then treat our new computers and managing our existing computers the same way. Okay, so you've built everything, you have your configurations ready to go. Now comes testing. And actually, really, you should test throughout the building process as well. We use parallels, and this allows us to capture a moment in time before we begin building. Then we build throughout. You can take snapshots throughout the build. You can test throughout, and then you can actually revert to a previous snapshot where you didn't have any of the building started yet, and you can run your completed package on a clean space. This allows you to see basically if everything's operating the way it should. You can try a couple of packages together, especially if they're calling upon the same license manager or something like that. Make sure everything's working software-wise. Meanwhile, your final testing should be on the physical hardware that is in the space. So you just want to have a final test on the variations of hardware in your environment. Jamf self-service, I like to think of this as a passive distribution option. So this allows your users to select applications when they need them on their own time. I would really consider standardizing what you make available in self-service against what you have as your current production configuration. This way, you don't have to worry about making your 0.0001 version changes available immediately. It allows you to manage your own time there. Jamf self-service is also helpful to include your removal scripts on, especially if a user were to call the help desk. A tech could know that the removal scripts are there and available. You could also make the removal scripts available on an at-need basis, depending on your environment. So that's a passive distribution option. Jamf Smart Group distribution is what we like to consider a silent distribution option. So we define our smart groups, computers enter, exit them. So here's an example where we needed to migrate from SCEP to ESET. We would basically just knew exactly what machines had ESET installed. We knew what machines had SCEP installed. When we created the smart groups, we then created a policy. Well, first I'll show you the smart group was having the admin account present and showing that it has a certain application type, and then we know it would go into the ESET smart group. And then we created a policy that scoped out where basically we had a script that removed the old software and put in the new software. It was a one-time script, but we also made it available via self-service if people wanted to do it on their own time. This is scalable because, as we talked about the naming conventions before, the computers moved in and out of those groups pretty effortlessly on our end.
So there's a couple third-party apps that can be helpful for this as well. Packages application is a great solution if you are not using Jamf for building your own packages. This is a great tool, just deploys any files to a static location with permissions that you define. This is great for moving things into the application folder pretty effortlessly. You can see in this example, I'm actually using this to deploy fonts to the root library. You also have the ability to deploy software via scripted installers. Now this is that curl installer I mentioned earlier, is where we're actually using a script to grab an installer file from a developer website, expand it if we need to, and then run it and install that package. This is great because you don't need to host the package and manage that, but this does require a little bit of additional upkeep. First of all, there's more complex logic to start up this kind of method. There's a lot more individual points of failure. And then you'll need to still keep track of what that download URL is as it changes over versions. You can actually run into some major problems with this if the developer decides for whatever reason to change the data structure on their website. If they change where they host those files, well, you're going to have to adapt to that because your installer is no longer going to work. Over here in Addigy, anything that's installed is generally considered a custom software, whether it's deploying a package, DMG, or even just running a script. And these have all the same basic anatomy. You've got name, you've got your version, your list of files to deploy. Generally speaking, PKGs are preferred. One neat thing that we have in here is the ability to add our own PPPC profiles in the piece of software itself. And so once you've added that package, Addigy scans through it, looks for app executables, and then we'll give you a drop-down list of them. You can select one, tell it what PPPCs it needs access to, build that right in. Got your description, and then the same 3 scripts we described before, your condition, install, and removal script. One other neat resource that they've got available is what they call a public software library. And those are apps that are either have their installers curated by Addigy, and they make available to all their clients, or ones that are curated by Addigy clients that they then submit for approval that then the rest of us can use. Now, Addigy's version of self-service is called MacManage, and this is the same basic idea. This is all about user remediation. So whether it's through Jamf or any other provider, this is a portal that allows users to install software or run scripts without needing admin credentials, stuff that you've handpicked for them. Certain ones of these, including MacManage, can link up with chat services or ticketing services as needs be. But we've sort of overlooked one particular method of app distribution, and that's going to be stuff from the app stores. Generally speaking for this, you're going to be going through what used to be called VPP, the Volume Purchase Program, and this has sort of been absorbed into Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager. This is going to be a recommended way to deploy content from the app stores, whether it's applications or even books and things like that. You do need to spend a little bit of time getting this set up. You'll need to create your ABM account, connect some tokens. This is a big subject, but I want to let you know that it is out there. It is very functional. It does support automatic updates, which is a little bit less that you will need to work on yourself, but do bear in mind that anything that you're not managing means you have a little bit less control over how it's going to function. So I mentioned this a couple times, but you should take a look at it. PPPCs and kernel extensions and kernel extension whitelisting. Now, these are really important just as far as reducing user friction when you're installing new software on their Macs. PPPCs, privacy, preferences, policy control. This is about an app's ability to access things that they need on your computer in order to function the way they want. You've probably seen this when you're launching applications that need to access certain file locations, or maybe they need to get accessibility. You can actually script these to be pre-approved so that applications don't need to ask anymore, and they'll just already be ready to go for your users. You do need to have your computer set up in an MDM solution to push these through. But if you can, get them out there before the installs occur, just again, to keep that user experience nice and smooth. Please do bear in mind that a couple of these cannot be scripted. That's going to be screen recording, microphone access, and camera access. Due to privacy concerns, that has to be approved by someone sitting at that machine. Generally speaking, when you're trying to figure out what sort of access you need, always check the developer documentation first. They can save you a lot of hunting in order to get that in there right the first time. Test like crazy. Launch the app. Do as many things as you can think of with the application you're working on to try to prompt these pop-ups. They'll always be very explicit as far as what they're asking for. Document those prompts, and then you can start building these profiles. This is, again, PPPC utility. Do be aware that certain applications, especially some security-focused apps, they may have multiple separate .app executables. And if that's the case, each one may have some separate needs. So again, check the developer documentation first. Another pop-up you'll sometimes see when installing new applications is going to be getting approval for a kernel extension. These are also common in input-output software and in security. You can script these as well. So they do often require admin permission to approve in order to not have users have to deal with that. Getting these deployed before the app goes out can be very valuable. You can create these kernel extension whitelists with your MDM servers of choice or any given application that supports it. Bottom corner, we've got the command that you'll use to locate the team identifier. And that's just a code sign command and then the path to the application with a couple arguments. And that's going to spit out this little alphanumeric key. You can see in the top screenshot, I've dropped that key into the allowed team identifier section. I can save that, deploy it across my team, and anything signed by that team ID is going to be allowed to run on that computer. You can get more specific and actually list the team identifier and the application itself. If you want to be, if you know that certain apps are going to cause problems for you from that same developer. Otherwise, we just tend to use the team ID as a whole. Now, I generally build these using Profile Creator or Addigy's native interface. iMazing also has a solution for this. In the current build of Apple Configurator 2, I wasn't able to get this running quite right. I have not looked at the changes for it that are going to be coming with Big Sur. I was just starting with this. So decide what you want, prepare, test, deploy. And of course, set aside a few dozen hours to figure out patch management, but that's a conversation for another day.
So at the end of the day, we hope that every time you look something up, it should be the last time you have to research it totally from scratch. We hope that you make your documentation clean and easy to follow for yourself and for your team. Record the work that you do and really figure out what those high priority automation targets are. It is better to spend a little bit more time now to set things up so that they're scalable, so that you don't have to rebuild things later. And then lastly, use the community. It's great that you're here at MacAdmins. Again, find people on Slack, ask questions, participate in this and the panel that follows us, and use each other so that you don't feel like you're a silo at your own workplace. Thank you to MacAdmins PSU for hosting us today. And then we'll end with some helpful links that we have, as well as our contact information and our contacts on Slack. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you both. That was a fantastic presentation. We do have a couple questions. If anyone else has further questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A now. I'm going to start off with the oldest and work towards the newest questions. And then if we have time, I'll maybe try and get to some of the things that I had questions about too, just selfishly. I might throw those in. So first off, how do you name machines not assigned to a user? For example, we have a shared use laptop for adjunct faculty in various offices.
I can take that question. So the way we do that is we essentially, instead of username, we go with department, and we treat the shared computer as being owned by the department. So in higher ed, if it's the French department, we'll just name it with the French department code name. And we could add a kit number like shared 1 or shared 2. So essentially, we just toggle the username.
Okay, great. Let's see. This is only applicable if you utilize Windows Active Directory and Domain Controller. Do you have a separate computer name to join to a domain that uses Windows Domain Controller limitations of 15 characters? I'm paraphrasing. So during Active Directory binding,
we don't run into a 15-character limit. Do you, Ross?
I haven't run into that, but we've also only got one of our clients using AD. and they're actually a client where they've requested that all their devices be named after their serial number. So
Okay.
that sort of took care of itself. We automated a script to make sure that it checks once a week to confirm that those names stay static, and then reapplies it.
And I think perhaps there isn't the option to have separate computer names from when binding to Active Directory, and so what personally I've seen after binding is when you set a computer name, if you change it, it does not update in Active Directory, and I think that's true. So perhaps if there was a need to have a name longer than 15 characters, then you could accomplish that with a shorter name first, binding, and then switching over to a new name after the bind has been completed. But I'm not sure if that's a real good suggested path or not. Not being, I don't know, too familiar with AD. Anyway, a question for Jamf Remote. Can Jamf Remote make an AD account?
I haven't done it through Jamf Remote myself. I've built it through Terminal. So I've connected via VPN and then built it that way. I'll have to check on Jamf Remote.
Okay, fantastic. Let's see. How would you avoid a downloaded app from running via the desktop or download folders, for example? And maybe this is how would you restrict a user from launching an application you did not want to run without it being installed in the applications folder? Perhaps is another way to ask this.
Most of our clients, we haven't run into an explicit need for like, all right, we want literally no application other than these 15, to be able to run at any given time. But what we have found are frameworks that are available. Jamf has something called restricted software. And then we've got an Addigy script that we can just copy and paste in wherever we need to be to run a process that just looks for like process ID names. And if it sees that name, halt it immediately. There's also some other solutions out there. I believe Google Santa does a similar thing where it actually can prevent certain process names from even launching, which stops that if there's something that they're worried about occurring, right on that initial launch before the other app can get in there and stop it.
Okay, fantastic. What are your thoughts on the deprecation of driver support in cups? It's still there, but warns that it'll go away. I'm concerned about customizations available through specific drivers that I haven't been able to set in generic IPP settings.
Oof, this one.
The $1 million question.
Yeah, right. I said we don't have a great solution for this yet. All we can really operate on is the fact that printer drivers are still, even though they're being deprecated, they're not there yet. And so all of our clients that are running on Xerox and Konica Minoltas that are, getting up to 10 years old plus, all we can do is keep track of the variables that we need to, make sure that all of our installation scripts map those appropriately. But until we start seeing people using driver kit and getting those deployed by the manufacturers, which we just haven't really run into yet, we haven't been able to do a lot of forward planning for that. So all I know is that, fingers are crossed, I don't think Big Sur is turning that off. So should be good for another year.
I also think once that starts and is actually happening, all of us will be talking about it on Slack, and it'll be really easy to see everybody's reaction in real time, and you won't have to do it by yourself.
Great point. Okay, next question. Is there a way to block a user or lock or block a user device after a certain number of failed login attempts? Additionally, can you receive an alert when something like that occurs through Jamf or Addigy?
Ooh, that would be an interesting policy to try to make. I wonder if there's a policy variable where you could track failed login attempts. They have a list of categories that you can look at for what you can make in a policy in Jamf.
I believe that there's an MDM payload for setting a number of login attempts that should be in the login window section. but that's just going to be for attempts. I don't think that's going to actually do any logging for you. It's not going to record, but just prevent people from spamming that too much. That's a wonderful question, though. It's because what you need to do if something's going to be running to monitor that, it needs to be running user agnostic. So it's got to fire as soon as the OS is loaded. So that's going to need some specific hooks to make that work.
Yeah, really good. Interesting question there. Let's see. I have a compliance requirement about password policy. I need to lock an account when it fails to log in, or is this the same question? Lock an account that hasn't. Oh, I need to lock an account who hasn't had any logins in a number of days through Jamf or Addigy. So there's the previous question, how to lock after a number of attempts, which we've kind of talked about there. But then there's the kind of secondary question: is there a way to lock an account that hasn't logged in a certain number of days prior to an attempt?
In Jamf, you can create a smart group. I alluded to this before, where you could have like a check-in policy, and maybe you could have that up on your dashboard where if a computer hasn't checked in a certain number of days, it would appear, and then you could either manually lock it at that point once you confirm it actually should be locked and it's not somebody on vacation. But I'd have to look into that too. That's a great question.
Awesome. Let's see. Is there a way to block some modules from system preferences through Jamf Pro and Addigy? So perhaps some of like the system preference panes, or third-party preference panes?
I can't speak for a third party, but there is an MDM configuration payload that allows you to toggle on and off your set of enabled preference panes. And so as far as anything that's first party, yes, you can build that MDM payload that is going to be platform agnostic, so you can push it from whatever MDM solution you're using. As long as you can pull that up, you just check or uncheck whatever you want users to see or not see, and then you can get that pushed out to your devices. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Let's see. Another question along the similar lines that we just talked about, so I'm skipping that one. Here's the next one. How do you use Kext Whitelists on Jamf?
That would probably be for another presentation. But there is a Jamf Slack channel that we could talk further offline.
Fantastic.
And to remember for this, you can also, while we've got Addigy has their own interface for it, I think Jamf does as well. You can also build these as MDM configurations. So as long as your platform does support that MDM framework in general, you can build these using one of those third-party tools I mentioned before, and then just upload the thing, push it out that way.
Awesome. Do you have any exemptions for computers in Jamf, such as university video departments, which might have specialized software for their video equipment?
So, okay, do we have any exemptions for computers from Jamf, such as university video department? It all comes, whatever request we get. So the faculty is always right. We will exempt whenever. We will make software available whenever. In terms of, I'm not sure if it's asking what is or is not enrolled in Jamf, but basically we can enroll anything in Jamf, and then we can be very specific with policy depending on where computers are installed for what software is available there. We definitely have lots of specialized software for video equipment. Maybe that's asking for if certain accounts have access, or if it's for individual faculty. I will say for the machines we hand out to faculty and staff, we allow our users to be admins on the machine, so they do have a lot of control over their software that way too.
Very good. We have a question about considering a move to Jamf from an MDM or Monkey environment. Does Jamf replace Monkey?
So I didn't use Monkey before. I inherited my Jamf instance. I've heard great things about both. So I think it is whatever your group is more appropriate for. But that might be, again, another good question in Slack to get a feedback from users of both platforms.
I had to deal with and we actually migrated from Jamf to Addigy, just speaking of platform migrations. And while we were doing that, we were able to a certain degree, have the computers live in both systems. They could only be bound to one MDM at a time. We could still keep the Jamf agent around, still use self-service as we sort of shifted things around. So I would be very curious to see if your monkey deployment can function without the MDM part. Then you could try, getting a couple test machines in Jamf with the Jamf MDM and a monkey agent on there, or vice versa, if you can run it with a Jamf MDM and monkey agent, something like that.
Great. Okay. How do you block the Apple tours or welcome to the new Mac OS operating system notifications that appear when you sign in for the first time on Mac OS?
Oh boy, these are, I know that there's, from watching the stuff that they announced during WWDC, a lot of this stuff is changing as far as what we can and can't control during that process. And I do know that when you're setting up automated device enrollment as far as first power on, I'm talking before we actually build the user account, and like when you make a new account on a Mac, how it says, great, tell me what you want to set up. You want to do Touch ID. For those initial prompts for the computer as a whole, you can make some really sweeping changes now through your MDM on which of those pages you can skip, or you can set predefined variables so that it'll automatically turn on or off Siri, what have you. On an individual user account level, I think usually we've ended up in the past not curating it and instead going for a script that when a user account's created, I don't remember, I wasn't around when we first set this up, but I know that there's a file that's inside the user library that is a check for whether or not that tour is run. And as long as you can get rid of that and make it so it knows that that has already been run, then you can probably skip that thing as a whole.
Also, for our class lab environment, we try to avoid it whenever we have a new student log into any machine. They would have run into that where it would welcome them to their new Mac if that was their first time signing in. So for us, we found where in basically the P list that's being run, if it's been shown to every user, and we put that in the user template to have it be checked that every user has seen this, so that when a user goes in for their first login, everybody thinks that it's already happened and they don't experience those screens. If you find me on Slack, I can share it with you.
Awesome. All right. So I had a couple things that a question and a couple comments, and I'd like to add in reverse order. So printers, wow, that's a lot. Images, the images are a fantastic idea. I think that's a great idea. In Jamf, when you're adding printers, it's global, and so how does that work between departments? Do you have people printing to the wrong locations? Is there like any restrictions that you can do, or like scoping? How do you handle that?
So thank goodness we have a centralized billing system. It does not matter where our users print. we are so lucky. So yes, that allows our users, as they move around campus, they go to meetings in different buildings, they can print from wherever. That allows us to let them add whatever they want to.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. We had another question just pop in. They're evaluating a move from Apple's profile manager to another MDM. I think it's a good call. Like Jamf or Addigy. What are the advantages of the other MDMs compared to Apple's profile manager?
I would say for Jamf, it's like the Cadillac of MDMs. You have all the features available to you and a great support community. I again inherited it, but then I also found new features that we weren't using yet that we were able to apply to our environment. So I think it's very customizable and they constantly update. And since it is a vendor and a paid product, you do have that support too.
Addigy is, I think, one of its biggest strong points. You're going to have a lot of similar functionality between whichever MDM platforms you're working on. One of Addigy's strongest points I found is how it interacts with devices live. And so especially in a situation where we're dealing mostly with an IT scenario for all of our clients, having my engineers be able to pull up a device, get its live stats and statistics, we can immediately pull up SSH tunnels onto those devices. We actually have a screen sharing solution developed by Addigy called Live Desktop that uses Apple's native VNC protocol to be able to give you screen access with no PPPCs, no third-party software required. It just digs you right in. And then we can also live deploy software scripts, profiles, MDM configurations. And so as some of those live support tools, I think, have been one of the biggest wins we found as we were switching platforms.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we're just about out of time and Q&A. Back to your presentation, I just had a couple more comments. Trello is a fantastic tool. We use it for the conference. We've been using it for years, and it's a great way to help keep us and the entire team organized. And version control stuff, if anybody's interested, we have at least, if not more than 7 MacAdmins presentations from previous conferences on version control, including Git and Subversion. So definitely check those out on the PSU Mac channel if you want to dig into more Git. One of the most popular ones is Nick McSpadden's using Git for literally everything from a couple years ago, which is a great thing to do. So again, thank you, Caroline and Ross. We really appreciate you taking the time to present.